The lesson today continues on from the lesson of last week about the man who was born blind. So we're going to finish it today. It's John 9 verses 13 to 41, and it's a longer session than normal. I'll read the passage first. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. The Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight, and he said to them, "He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" There was a division among them. So they again said to the blind man, "What do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But how he now sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess him to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you too want to become his disciples?" And they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Why, this is a marvel. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshipper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born in utter sin, and you would teach us?" And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" The cured man, Jesus said to him, "You have seen him. It is he who speaks to you." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this, and they said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." Well, the man who's been restored to sight, who's been given sight, is now brought to the Pharisees. And that's because it's thought by the ordinary Jewish people of the day that the Pharisees were the proper authority to judge the miracle of healing. The real sticking point here is not the healing so much as that the healing was done on the Sabbath. Recall the story of John 5, 1-18, which we read several weeks ago now, when Jesus also healed on the Sabbath. But now, Jesus doesn't simply heal on the Sabbath, he breaks the Sabbath himself because he needs the clay for putting on the eyes of the man who's born blind. So Jesus doesn't restore the man's sight, rather he gives him sight. The Pharisees ask the man who's been cured how it happened. And once again we see, as is so often in John, a forensic examination, this time of the man born blind. But soon Jesus is going to be subject to the same sort of forensic examination. The man who's been born blind says that I washed and I see, the Greek verb blepo. And blepo suggests not only physical sight, but also intellectual or spiritual sight. That's to say, he understands. He just doesn't simply see physically. And the whole passage will turn on this ambiguity of seeing physically and understanding a situation. It used to be, we saw in the Festival of Booths, that the ordinary people were divided in their views of Jesus. Now the Pharisees are divided. Is Jesus diabolical because he heals on the Sabbath and therefore breaks Torah? Or is he from God because of the powerful good deeds that he does? And they can't resolve this. They ask the blind man who he thinks Jesus is, perhaps hoping that the blind man will say, I believe he's the Christ, in which case he'll be immediately kicked out of the synagogue. But the man who's been born blind says he's a prophet. His vision is spiritual as well as physical. He understands the situation and just doesn't see sensuous items. So he has penetrating understanding. But there's a limit to it. He says that Jesus is a prophet, not the prophet. Now, the Jews, the Pharisees, are so staggered about this miracle they can't really believe that the man has always been blind. So they summon his parents to find out. Notice that John alternates the Pharisees and the Jews. So when we see the Jews, just read Pharisees. It's not all the Jewish people. And of course it's unlikely to be all the Pharisees as well. They were a divided group themselves. So they bring the parents in and interrogate them. And they say, he's our son, and he was born blind. But how he's got his sight back, we don't know. Now, it seems very unlikely that the man's parents would be the very last to know of the miraculous cure. It's more likely, I think, that they are evading the question put to them by the Pharisees, because they don't want to be ousted from the synagogue. So the man himself, we don't know quite how old he is, has to give testimony. In Jewish law, you could give testimony from the age of 13 on. So it might well be that the man born blind is no more than a teenager. He might be a young man. John adds that they pass the buck because they're afraid of the Jews, of being kicked out of the synagogue. And what does that mean, to be exiled from the synagogue, to be excommunicate? First of all, it means you can't be in communion with anyone who's in the synagogue. You would be completely alienated in your community. More, it could mean that one day you're going to be subject to torture and crucifixion, because you might be asked by a Roman soldier to burn incense before an image of Caesar, son of the god Julius Caesar. And no righteous Jew would do that. So they put all the pressure upon their son to speak. We hear of Christians being excluded from the synagogue, Jewish people who are followers of Jesus. We hear of such people being excluded from the synagogue in Luke 6, verse 22. But generally, followers of Jesus were not expelled until after the death of Jesus. And so we can see that John is writing from the perspective of the early church. So the Pharisees bring the man formerly blind back into the synagogue, and they say, "Give God the praise," which is a Jewish expression which means admit the truth. It comes from Joshua 7. They say, "We know that this man is a sinner." So they claim to see Jesus better than anyone else. And it's highly ironic, since the Pharisees are portrayed as being blind to the truth and deaf to the truth. Also, be it noticed that Jesus is not even present in these proceedings, and they can condemn him completely legally, in absentia. The man born blind answers the Pharisees, and unlike his parents, he's completely forthright. He sees spiritually, intellectually, as well as physically. The Pharisees question him again about how his eyes were made to open, and he answers them rather cheekily. He loses patience with the Pharisees and makes them indignant. He points out that the Pharisees don't listen well, no more than they see well. And they mock him. And they say, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses." And we get, ironically here, a distinction between the old Moses of Mount Sinai and Jesus as the new Moses. They then level the charge against Jesus that we don't know where he comes from. What they're after is to get a confession of him being the Messiah, and the Messiah comes from Bethlehem. Interestingly, just before this passage, when Jesus was at the Feast of Booths, it was said against him by the people that they knew where he came from. So he can't have it either way. Either people know where he comes from, or they don't know where he comes from, and he's condemned both ways. The man born blind continues to be forthright and says, "Look, it's never been known that anyone blind from birth has been cured in this way, so the man must be from God." Notice he's saying that Jesus is a man, a prophet. He's not making any larger claims than that. But he does see, begins to see with the eyes of faith. The Pharisees won't have this, and they cast him out of the synagogue. They judge him unjustly. They maybe exclude him from the synagogue for a year, maybe longer, maybe forever. So we've been hearing this threat that anyone who says that Jesus is the Messiah will be cast out from the synagogue. The man born blind doesn't go that far. He doesn't say that Jesus is the Messiah, but he's kicked out of the synagogue anyway. Now, interestingly, as soon as the man born blind is kicked out of the synagogue, Jesus seeks him out. It's entirely characteristic that Jesus goes like a good shepherd after the outcast. And he asks the man he's cured if he believes in the Son of Man. And the man born blind says, "Who is this person?" Jesus says, "It's me." And it's interesting that the man born blind seems to know what the expression Son of Man means. It's got messianic significance for the Jews. And then the man born blind says, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. That's to say, he bends down, he prostrates himself in a very deep bow. So the second miracle in this passage is one of belief. Belief comes to the man who's been cured. Not everyone who Jesus helps believes in him, but the man who's been blind from birth does. Jesus then gives a general statement about why he's come into the world, to make those who are blind see, and those who think they see show they're really blind. So the spiritually blind will be able to see properly, while those who take themselves to be able to see spiritually by way of the law will be blind to the spiritual realm that Jesus proclaims, the kingdom. The Pharisees overhear this and of course don't like it because it's casting aspersions on them. And Jesus says to them, if you were blind, you would have no guilt, but now that you say we see, your guilt remains. The man born blind has not been punished for any sin. It's the Pharisees who are refusing to see Jesus as the Son of Man who are being sinful. They are the